What made you quit a job on the spot? Nothing dramatic. After working my A off during the pandemic and promised an additional bonus, I received a low performance review conveniently timed a day before my bonus was to be paid. The low performance feedback cancelled my bonus. Given all the other bullshit I was putting up with, I broke and quit. I had a nice month off and my new job pays significantly more. Never work for people that don't appreciate you. There are always others that will. I unfortunately work for a company that is currently doing this to me. Busted my L through the pandemic. I work on healthcare equipment. Working 12-15 hour days regularly. Got the attaboys from the company and managers and was promised a pretty substantial bonus. The end of the fiscal year rolls around and we got our overtime cut instead of the bonus due to unprotected expenditures, yet the corporate guys and managers got 5-figure bonuses for weathering out the storm of the pandemic and succeeding beyond expectations. This was the final confirmation I needed to start looking for a different position. I used to cut grass in a cemetery. I used to push lawnmower and had to lift it up onto the elevated graves, and then back down and onto the next one. Over and over and over. Minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. After an hour of cutting grass in the August heat, I sit down for my break, and this guy named Leroy asks, "Was that worth $4.25 to you?" I quit the next day. Thanks, Leroy. Asked for a raise and was told okay. Next morning, Friday, I was told by the same person who agreed with the raise that I should put a few more years in and then we'll talk again. Locked my toolbox at the end of the day and called a tow truck to pick it up. Shop manager was shocked that next Monday to find an empty spot where my tools were and couldn't understand why I left. You are braver than me. I was told I'd get a raise and stuck around waiting for it for 6 months before finally jumping ship. This was after 4 years of my career with no change in pay whatsoever and consistent, good quality work. Now I advocate for myself. It was to the point I was fixing power strokes on the side and making more money after work. I was 20 at the time and had gone to college and all the extra classes for the automaker. I was too educated for what they were paying me and I couldn't stand it. But to your point, never sell yourself short and you know what you're worth and shouldn't settle. My grandfather, who I considered like a father, passed away after a long stay in hospital. We were closer than he was with his own kids, and our bond was quite special. I spoke to my manager about getting the day of his funeral off, since I was organizing part of the arrangements, and having a day or two of bereavement leave, and he agreed. The day of the funeral finally comes and the staff start calling me, leaving me messages asking why I'm not at my shift, and telling me, while I'm in a suit hosting family members at the funeral home, that I have to find someone to replace me or face repercussions. Needless to say, I told them to figure it out and never looked back. Walked into the interview. Everything went well, accepted the job offer, went to the front desk to do the paperwork and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount, and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 a week. I asked first about the amount difference, was told, "Oh, this the standard contract. It just hasn't been updated for your specific offer." I told them they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. "Oh, that's not how things work here." I thanked them for their time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day I was supposed to have started asking where I was. I told them because didn't sign the contract. I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call. Similar situation for me. Back in 2012 I was looking for a job in anything other than food but got desperate. This burger place had just opened up and was desperate for workers. They advertised on their window $11.75 an hour starting for all positions. I applied, had an interview basically the second I turned in my application and got hired 20 minutes later, at the end of my shift, which was about 3 hours. They said they would start me at minimum wage, because you haven't finished your bachelor's degree yet. I was speechless. If I had finished my bachelor's degree, why would I be working here? And for such low pay? I told them to cash out my pay immediately and I would not be returning because of their deceit. There weren't any stipulations anywhere on the sign that said anything about needing an undergrad degree for that much pay. They cashed me out at $11.25 per hour and I left. They closed down back in 2018 and every year Spirit Halloween takes over the location. FM. Worked for a privately owned bakery for exactly 1 week. The owner's son comes in, walks past the counter and into the bathroom. He comes out a few minutes later without acknowledging me or my coworker, gets into his car and drives away. We both looked at each other, then opened the door only to find this guy literally shawl over the toilet seat and the toilet paper holder. I called the owner, told her what happened, and she said to deal with it. So I asked my coworker if she wanted to clean it up because I wasn't going to. She declined and I told her I was walking out. She did as well. We locked up the store and told the owner we quit but would reconsider staying if her son came back to clean up his own mess. She yelled and berated us for 20 seconds before I said goodbye and hung up. I worked for T-Mobile store, authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. 1 week. I had an amazing week. Sold 55 phones. Brand new activations on a business account with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork in case this happened so you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office, and they told me it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections and they did settle before I took them to court. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually lead to an investigation by the government, according to an old co-worker I bumped in 2 years later. Worked as a cashier in a local shop. One night 2 guys came at me with knives trying to get in the till. I just walked away and said have at it, as it wasn't worth the minimum wage to get into it with a couple of guys waving knives at me. After they ran out the store I picked up my mobile and called the police, then called the store manager. The next day, the district manager meets me as I turn up for my shift the very next day. Her first words were it was very unprofessional of me to be on my phone while in work. I laughed at her and told her she could take this as my notice and walked out. I never had a problem with being held up, but the sheer gall of that got me. Not me, but a middle-aged tradesman where I work. I work underground and it isn't for everybody. Terrible environment and whatnot. This particular individual starting working and after a few weeks decided that it wasn't for him. Bad conditions and hostile supervisor. He approached the boss at the morning meeting and told him that he wasn't going underground and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he had to give him 2 weeks notice, and without missing a beat the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks you're gonna notice that I'm not here." Turned around, packed his shit and left. Was never heard from again. I got mugged on a delivery for Domino's and came back to the shop crying and panicked. Had my phone, wallet, and pizza taken. Told my manager what happened. Are you hurt? No. But I lost my phone and wallet. I need to call the police. No time for that. Here's your next delivery. It was like 2 blocks from where I was just mugged. I just went home. The police never really did much to get my phone and wallet back. Not like they could. Began working at a Persian restaurant in the kitchen. I overcooked a steak slightly. The owner came back, threw a plate at us, then a hot meat skewer before storming off to his office. I dropped my apron, grabbed my bag and told him I was leaving. His response was, "Okay, at the end of the night you can go." My response was clearly, "You don't understand. I'm leaving right now. Here's my parking pass. I'll expect my check in the mail." Getting reprimanded for not pushing a patient into getting a dental procedure he didn't need or want. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble or hot and spicy with a small fries and drink for our lunch break. One day when I went on break, the franchise owner was there, and when he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy, he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and started walking towards the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of customers and my co-workers. I couldn't believe it. This grown successful businessman was hounding at 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. Told him I wasn't gonna pay. Put the food down and walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend. I told them no thanks and never went back. Worked for a restaurant pub. The owner would come in with his buddies for hours at a time. A lot of times forcing the bartender to stay way past close serving them. Obviously was told not to charge anything because it's the owner's party. After hours of drinks on the house. No tip. Not even from the owner. This started to happen frequently. Usually we'd put up with it if they leave or be done before close. Then we started hearing that the kitchen staff hadn't been paid in a month. Bartenders were being paid because we made like $4 an hour. But the kitchen wasn't a tipped kitchen and made a decent wage. Turns out the owner was a total drunk F-wit, which should have been obvious, and buried himself in debt. A week later we were told our checks weren't there on the day they were supposed to be. Then 2 days later still no checks. I told them if my check wasn't there tomorrow, I won't come in for my shift. They said it came. I got there and they said, well, what I meant was it's actually on the way. I talked to the and I walked out. I later found out no checks were ever issued there again. They tried to pay some people cash but it fell apart very soon after. Lol. I had an inside hint from HR that there was about to be mass layoffs and my name was on the list. I scheduled my week-long vacation and returning the day before layoffs were presumed to have happened. My boss reamed me out for daring to take a vacation. She said I would never advance in the company if I chose such a formative time in our project to take a vacation. She told me I would never be an executive producer if I went on a vacation before project launch, even though I wouldn't be able to touch it for the week I was away anyways, and that I would always be known in the television industry as lazy. I chilled, took my vacation, and returned. She was mad and said that she was upset with me for having left and made her take care of my project for me, chewed me out in front of the entire company in the conference room. I chilled and was like, aren't you laying off a bunch of us tomorrow? I'm just waiting for you to fire me so I can collect unemployment. Entire room literally starts panicking and management tries to understand how the F I knew about layoffs. It was my one true Regina George causing chaos moment in my life. I worked for an attorney. I was 7 months pregnant. I was supposed to be a secretary but instead I was constantly being sent out as a process server. In July, at the end of my 3 months, August, I was supposed to get a raise and she said that she couldn't give me a raise. The day she said that, I left at lunch and never went back. She was an awful person and the guy I replaced told me that he felt sorry for me on my first day as he was leaving. I should have left that day. I am a physician assistant and took a job at an urgent care. After working there for about a month I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager not being as astute as she should have been and brought it up to the doctor who owned the place. He said he would talk to her and straighten it out. Then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, you know, this has been going on forever, right? She then said that things would never change and to get used to it because the expired medications had been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She then also told me that the autoclave, the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made out a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, they suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck driver physical exams. I was at a company for about 1.5 years as an assistant project manager. In that 1.5 years, I had 3 different bosses. The newest one being a heavy micromanager. I was getting paid about 20% below the standard salary for the position. Overworked without any additional compensation. And the overall culture of the company was just flawed. My boss started nitpicking my work at the end of the day. I told her I had plenty of time to get it done before the end of the day, but she kept pushing and escalating. She was borderline screaming and I just cut her off and said, I'm not doing this sh anymore. I quit. She yelled back, well, I need it in writing, and I said back with the straightest face, I don't have to do sh in writing. I quietly packed all my stuff up, said good luck to my co-workers, and left. A year later, after working a couple of other jobs, I accepted a project manager position with a competing company and make almost twice as much as I was making at the previous. And I get to post on Reddit while at work without getting yelled at.